Ladies and gentlemen, are you watching from a fridge? I know 1% of you are watching from an external device, which is not a computer, a tablet, or a phone. So I'm assuming that you're watching from a smart fridge. Well, knowing that this video is about fridges, we're going to look at this beautiful game Robert James Bobby Fischer played in 1956 against I'm just going to call it Donald. This is more popularly known as the game of the century. It is really beautiful, and um, Bobby Fischer plays two beautiful moves. So let's begin. So Donald starts with the ready opening, which is knight f3. I personally would not recommend the ready. I would recommend the simple e4. But the ready is also an option. What we call the ready is a hyper-modern opening, as white is not controlling the center with the pawn, but rather a different piece, which is in this case a horsey. Knight to f6. This is copycat variation, as you can see. c4. Now we're transitioning into a sort of English, which is this. And there is this variation, which is known as the King's Indian variation. And now this is a possible move. So we see a possible transition from the English. So Bobby Fischer plays in the best way possible with this kind of setup is to go for a typical King's Indian, as it is very likely for this game to actually transpose into a. And Bobby Fischer loved King's Indian defenses. Anyway, knight to c3, bishop to g7, d4. Now we see a transition. This is one of the popular variations where white will play g3, 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 and bishop to g2 and castle. It is known as the fianchetto variation. I think that's how you pronounce it. Don't hate on me if it's not. But white would like to use the same approach black usually uses and try to get an advantage with his bishop, like we do typically in the King's Indian. Knight to c3, d4, castles, bishop to f4. Now Donald is transitioning into a kind of London Queen's Gambit-esque thing. It's kind of avoiding the typical King's Indian defense because white is defending the e5 square, which is usually vital for black if he wants to play the King's Indian, because black's usual plan is to play d6, knight to either d7 or c6, usually d7, and then followed up with e5. But in this case, that's not possible, so white avoids this idea. So instead, Bobby Fischer is going for a kind of Grunfeld defense. The typical idea of this variation is to strike in the center and basically say that in this case, white is not really prepared to play the London against this kind of opening, since it's more proactive, and white can't play the typical London setup. So queen to b3 is a good move. White applies pressure, forcing black to make a decision with his pawn. Defend it with a move like c6, which isn't as good, but it is still an option. Or take it, which Bobby Fischer does. Queen takes c4. And the point for black is that this queen is really misplaced. This queen, it looks really active, and it's not the worst piece in the world, but it sort of really isn't attacking anything vital. White's main argument here is that he can claim the center with e4 and try to overrun black. So what black's going to do is he's going to prevent white from getting any sort of counterplay with d5 in the future and try to hold still. e4, knight b to d7, rook to d1. this is actually interesting, not castling, but basically Donald is showing his cards, but he's going to try to take advantage and use this d5 push. Now he's definitely going to castle short, but Bobby Fischer doesn't have any way now to exploit it. So it is a fine move, in my perspective. Though, I mean, it's kind of odd because it's not really the best plan right now. White should probably focus on getting his king out of the center and then overrunning. But Donald decides to do it this way, which is also fine. Knight to b6. Black will try his best to disallow d5 in the potential discovery on the queen. Queen to c5. And this is what I'm talking about. Black gains tempo on the misplaced queen, and now the queen is even worse. It's just simply staring at the e7 pawn, which isn't really helpful for anyone. And it can be easily targeted and potentially actually trapped with knight to d7. Hopefully knights can't move that way. My computer's breaking. Knight to d7. And the bishop opens on the fierce diagonal. Bishop to g4. I think this is a pretty nice move. Basically, black is going to take. A lot of people say not to take bishop for knight. But in some cases, this is actually a decent plan. Let's say white plays bishop to not bishop to e2, like bishop to. This is hard to find actually a move that doesn't lose the game. Okay, h3, which is probably what some people would actually play. You would take here, which is an interesting idea. And what you're going to say is that you have doubled pawns. This is what we call double pawns. There are two pawns on a file, which usually doesn't happen. And if you trade into an endgame, you're going to be better because these pawns are really weak. Because in the previous position, if we imagine, I don't know, yeah, let's say like black backs up, right? Now, what happens, let's just play some stupid moves like rook to c8. These are really stupid moves, you shouldn't play this. Now f3, and you see this beautiful pawn chain? All these pawns are defending each other. But in this position, we see, with the idea, now these pawns are stuck, and this pawn can't ever move without this pawn moving. And this is kind of a destroyed structure. What white is arguing is that he's going to play rook to g1 and attempt an attack. That seems really far-fetched, and that is a true statement. White doesn't have any sort of attack here. So, let's not go too off track. Bishop to g5 happens. This is like, I don't know. That's me. This is a really bad move. Like, if you, I don't know. I bet not even a beginner could explain this move. Like, nobody even considers this move. This does absolutely nothing. I have no idea. And it's very important to note that you shouldn't move your piece twice in an opening if it's literally fine on that square. The bishop did not have any problems. Like, it was perfect. But then Donald decided to move it, which makes no sense. So, here you would be thinking what to do, right? A regular human like me would play something like h6, and I'll be like, where's the bishop going to go, right? This bishop is either going to take, which is bad, because now you attain a thing called the bishop pair. The bishop is raging down this diagonal, and this bishop has some pressure on this knight. In this case, where this bishop is really good, you don't want to trade and continue with the plan. Let's say h3. You do not want to take. I don't care what the engine says. You could probably play something like bishop to d7. But in this case, it's actually decent to take. But in an overall strategical term idea, it's not a good idea because now both these bishops control um all the opposing colors. This dark square bishop controls all the dark squares. It keeps control of the dark squares, and now it's doing an amazing job. This bishop right here, it's not doing so good. You would likely play bishop to e6 if it wasn't met with um, d5, which is not a good idea now, but in the future. And now this bishop is doing an amazing job, and white is completely dominated by these bishops. These knights have nothing on these two bishops. So in this type of position, you do not want to take on f3. It is a bit hard to know the difference of when to take, but just remember, if you have a good bishop, if you have two bishops and one of them is a monster, you don't want to trade the other one. You should keep it for later. If you can win material, there's no reason of keeping it, but if not, in a positional standpoint, it is better not to. So bishop to g5, and now Bobby Fischer plays the I swear, unhuman move. Knight to a4. When I saw this first, this never came to my mind. Like, this is so stupid. I mean, I don't even recommend it to some. If this was like, this move is so good that I wouldn't even recommend it to a person because nobody can see this unless Bobby Fischer. So the practical idea is that we use the point that this look. So this is kind of complex, but I'll try to make you understand in simple terms. So this knight is defending e4, correct? If Bobby Fischer could take this pawn without this knight defending the bishop, just imagine this knight is disappeared, but his position is still fine. This queen and bishop are forked, but it's not any type of fork. If the queen could move to any square along this rank, then he would be fine. But actually, he has to move back, after which the bishop is free. In more simple terms, I'll just show it to you so that you understand. Don't play that move. So, takes, and now this queen has no moves on this rank. All of the moves hang the queen. After here, you could take here first, but actually this is worse. You might say, oh, this is actually a good move. But now you have some problems because this is actually a fork. And you're losing material, but you're also winning some materials. So it's actually a bit more complex than you would like it to be. So you could probably just settle on taking this and being up a pawn. Though, this is actually an interesting idea here. No, actually, yeah, this is also winning. I think, wait, I just need to check. I'm pretty sure you can, wait. You can also take here. I just noticed that. If he takes the, these are bloopers right here. I didn't prepare for this. Take. And now, if he takes here, after Bobby takes here, this didn't happen in the game. I'm just looking at this line because it's important. So, instead of moving away, the best option is to take here. Now, white is counterattacking the queen in exchange for his queen. So after takes, black takes here, we count the material and it's equal. So you might question what's up. Let's say bishop to g5, which is actually really odd. Well, actually, after you move the bishop and take, now, okay, yeah, I told you not to trade here, but you're gonna be up material and you are better. So you should take. You can actually just win this pawn if you want to. You don't really win it, but your opponent, I mean, no, you do win it. You can win two actually. See, you win a pawn. And also, as I mentioned earlier, it's even worse because this is what we called isolated doubled pawns. What I mean by isolated is if you look at the files beside it, they're completely empty. There are no more pawn friends to help these guys be structured. So they're also isolated. And you don't want to be isolated. So that's really bad. White is completely lost in this position. My computer is breaking yet again. Wait. So, instead of that, Donald sees this and plays queen to a3, though this isn't going to be much better. So, you have a few options here. You can take here, which is bad. You can or you can take here. This is much better because here, if you do this, you allow white to defend the e4 pawn, which you are going to use in tactics later. So takes. Now, if queen takes, this becomes much more complex because now there's a fork with a tempo, and you need to look what happens when pieces take. I'm sorry, that's a call. I don't know what's happening. Okay, so more bloopers. Yay. So you have knight takes e4, and you need to look what happens in the position every time a move happens. See, the bishop opens up, and the what? And the queen is here to assist it. And the bishop, and this is hanging. Let's say play queen to e3 hangs. I just want to mention e3 is really bad. It looks normal, but you hang. It's actually a complex tactic. Wait, what happens? More bloopers. Oh, queen to a5. This is interesting. See, so this knight, you would love to play queen to a5 here, but the problem here is that there's b4, and after you take, you can block. Wait, why can't you just block here? What's? Oh yeah, this rook is free. Wait, what? You would take the bishop and then you would take the rook. So what b4 does is that now the queen doesn't have its eyes on the bishop. So this bishop is not hanging. If you take here, then actually, even though you're down material, you're actually losing. But you're not. You are losing that badly, but like it's a bit more complex because white has a lot of activity. And he has this fork at the end, which doesn't really work because of here. But still. He has a lot of activity. An engine can win this, but it's slightly harder for a human. So that's why. What was I saying? Yeah, that's why knight takes queen takes c3 is worse. So Donald plays the right option, which is kind of surprising. He plays bc3. Now knight takes e4 happens. Is this okay? Bishop takes e7. Now there's a fork. It's a difficult decision here. And so what he does is that he sacrifices the rook. This is really interesting because what he's trying to do is that look I just want you to take a second and look at white's position here. White's queen is on the worst possible square, and it's literally almost trapped. It's doing absolutely nothing. The rook is completely stuck. We can't even call it a piece in the game, right? This knight doesn't have a job because it's completely pinned. The king is stuck in the center, and this bishop is the only really active piece, but it's not doing anything along the diagonal. So now, for example, black will follow up with something like rook to e8, and he's completely destroying white's king. White has absolutely no defense in this position. For example, here, bop, if you take, there's a pin in a skewer, or a pin, I think it's a pin, yeah. And you win the queen. And now you lose the bishop. You literally lose the bishop. You have practically no defense. If you go here, you can just play here, and there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of pins, and white is completely destroyed. This is a really complex game, so I'm sorry if you're not getting some of the ideas. But you can find the PGN online and try to analyze it with the game. I'm just explaining this in an easier way. So bishop to c4. I mean, it doesn't really matter what you play. It's not such like a complex move. But basically, white is trying to castle and get away from all the stuff we just saw. Knight takes c3. Again, if you recapture, there is the beautiful pin, and you lose the bishop. It's actually really hard to see, so I don't expect anyone to find it. So bishop to c5, only move. You can't take. Why did? Okay. Rook to f to e8. Now Donald can't castle, so his king is really vulnerable, and his rook is doing absolutely nothing. Bishop to e6. This is just insane. The queen is hanging, but it isn't hanging because after he moves here, check, check, not mate. I don't know why the engine just took the pawn. It's so confusing. What's the purpose of taking the pawn? Okay, whatever. We're just gonna go with the engine's line. Oh, this happened in the game. Oh, never mind. So you have to take the queen. If you don't, the bishop's hanging. If you take here, you blunder smothered mate, actually, which is interesting. Check, check. And so what smothered mate is the king is smothered by his own pieces, and there's usually a knight which checkmates the king in the midst of his own pieces. The king, it's so ironic. The king is defended with all his pieces, yet the pieces can't do anything. They're actually not helping the king at all. So, this happens in the game, so I actually don't need to show you the variation. So, check, check. You take here first. And then check. And then you can take here. I don't think knight takes c3 was the best. Yeah, a takes b6. And what's so interesting here is you're lost. You're down like right here. You can see the piece numbers. You're down a pawn, which is actually really surprising. But you're gonna take the rook next and actually be up material. And then you have this, and then you have a lot of back rank mate threats. So you actually win the game. So yeah, I was gonna explain it to you. I was just understanding it. So after you take the queen, check. You have to play this because you force the king back to f1. And now check. You take the pawn. You're gonna take all you want right now because there's no. What's surprising is that there's no checkmate. But you're up. You've taken so much material from white that it doesn't even matter. And so here Bobby wins in style. He sacrifices the pawn. He takes the rook. Donald has to prevent mate, but there's too many pawns. And white white has a queen, and a queen really can't do anything. And I just want to say, this knight hasn't moved. Look at this knight on f3 or move 29. This knight hasn't moved since move 29, which is actually kind of insane. So the queen can't do anything, and finally the knight moves on move 30. Bishop to d5, knight to e4. Donald's trying to do everything, but Bobby's just gonna push or checkmate. Actually, he checkmates in style. Two bishops and a rook. Wait, it's like an easier bishop and a knight checkmate because Bobby is a rook, which controls the second file rank. And it's just a bishop and a knight checkmate. And this game is like absolutely crazy. So thank you for your viewership if you made it so far. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I don't know how do you do it on a fridge, don't ask me. And see you in the next video. Now get out of here.